Harold Hank Mitchell had seen enough war for 10 lifetimes. At 78 years old, his weathered hands still carried the muscle memory of combat from the beaches of Normandy to the forests of Germany. But on this crisp October morning in 2019, he wasn't thinking about the past. He was focused on the annual precision shooting competition at Cedar Ridge Gun Club, where marksmen from 3 states gathered to test their skills. Hank pulled his old pickup truck into the gravel parking lot, the engine coughing like an old soldier with too many cigarettes behind him. In the truck bed, wrapped carefully in a faded green canvas case, lay his most treasured possession, a 1943 Springfield M1 Garand rifle, the same rifle that had carried him through 18 months of brutal fighting across Europe. The same rifle that had saved his life more times than he could count. As Hank stepped out of his truck, younger competitors were already setting up their equipment nearby. Their rifles gleamed with modern accessories, high-powered scopes, adjustable stocks, precision barrels that cost more than Hank's monthly pension. These men, mostly in their 30s and 40s, represented the new generation of competitive shooters. They had expensive gear, computer-calculated loads, and scientific approaches to marksmanship. "Look what the cat dragged in," chuckled Mike Bradshaw, a cocky 40-year-old who owned the local gun shop. He wore military-style clothing covered in patches and logos, though he'd never served a day in uniform. "Grandpa's bringing his museum piece again." The comment drew snickers from Mike's group of friends. They called themselves the Precision Squad and dominated the local shooting scene with their custom rifles and endless talk about ballistics coefficients and mil-dot calculations. To them, Hank was a relic from a bygone era, stubbornly clinging to outdated equipment. Hank ignored the laughter and carefully removed his rifle from its case. The M1 Garand looked ancient compared to the modern weapons around it. The wood stock showed decades of careful maintenance, but also bore the inevitable scratches and dings of age. The metal parts had a deep, honest patina that spoke of countless hours in the field. Most notably, it still wore its original iron sights. No scope, no laser rangefinder, just simple metal posts and apertures. "Hey, Hank," called out Jimmy Rodriguez, the competition organizer and one of the few people who treated the old veteran with respect. "You sure you want to compete in the precision division? We've got a vintage military category that might be more appropriate." The suggestion, though well-intentioned, stung. Hank had been shooting competitively for over 50 years. He'd won countless trophies and set several range records back in the day. But that was decades ago, when iron sights and military surplus rifles were still competitive. The sport had evolved, embraced technology, and seemingly left old-timers like him behind. "I'll stick with precision, thanks," Hank replied quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. "This old girl's still got some fight left in her." More laughter rippled through the crowd. Brad Morrison, a software engineer who treated shooting like a mathematical equation, shook his head in disbelief. "Hank, my rifle alone cost $8,000. The scope is worth more than your truck. You're talking about competing against equipment that can calculate wind drift and bullet drop automatically." "And don't forget," added Mike Bradshaw, "today's challenge is the 1,000-yard shot. That's further than most people can even see clearly, let alone hit with iron sights. You'd need eyes like Superman and hands steadier than a robot." The 1,000-yard challenge was indeed the day's main event. It had been added to the competition 5 years ago when the club acquired additional land extending their range. The current record stood at 1.2 inches, a grouping so tight it defied belief. That record belonged to Marcus Webb, a former Marine sniper who'd set it 3 years ago with a custom rifle worth more than a new car. Marcus himself stood nearby, cleaning his precision instrument with religious devotion. His rifle was a work of art, a custom action bedded in a carbon fiber stock, topped with a scope that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Every component had been selected, tested, and fine-tuned for maximum accuracy. When Marcus shot, he didn't just aim, He calculated wind speed, humidity, air pressure, and temperature to the degree. "Nothing personal, old-timer," Marcus said with what passed for kindness in the competitive shooting world. "But this isn't World War II anymore. Warfare has evolved, and so has marksmanship. Iron sights are like bringing a horse to a car race." Hank finished assembling his rifle and checked its operation with practiced efficiency. The familiar weight felt good in his hands, 8.5 pounds of steel and wood that had never let him down. He'd carried this rifle across half of Europe, slept with it in muddy foxholes, and trusted it with his life when it mattered most. "Maybe so," Hank replied, working the bolt action to chamber a round. "But horses sometimes remember trails that cars can't follow." The cryptic response earned him more eye rolls from the younger shooters. They saw an old man living in the past, unwilling to embrace progress. What they didn't see was 60 years of accumulated wisdom, muscle memory forged in life-or-death situations, and an intuitive understanding of marksmanship that couldn't be programmed into a computer. As the morning wore on and competitors began their practice rounds, Hank quietly set up at his assigned shooting position. He laid out his equipment with military precision: a simple shooting mat, a small bag of sand for support, and 10 rounds of ammunition he'd loaded himself using techniques learned decades ago. No wind meters, no ballistic computers, no range-finding devices, just a man, his rifle, and skills honed by necessity rather than hobby. The laughter and whispered comments continued around him, but Hank had learned long ago to tune out noise that didn't matter. In the war, concentration meant survival. In competition, it meant accuracy. Either way, focus was everything. Little did anyone know that they were about to witness something extraordinary. The old veteran and his ancient rifle were about to remind everyone that some things never go out of style, and that experience often trumps technology when it truly matters. The competition began with shorter distances to warm up the shooters. At 200 yards, then 400, the modern rifles performed exactly as expected. Computer-calculated precision, laser-measured distances, and scientifically optimized ammunition produced tight groups that clustered around the bullseye like perfectly planned formations. Marcus Webb shot first at each distance, his custom rifle barely moving as he squeezed off methodical shots. His spotting scope revealed groups that could be covered by a quarter. Mike Bradshaw followed with similar results, his expensive equipment performing flawlessly. One by one, the Precision Squad members demonstrated why they dominated competitions for years. Then came Hank's turn. The old veteran approached the firing line with none of the ceremony his competitors displayed. No elaborate setup routine, no checking and rechecking of equipment, no consulting of weather apps or ballistic charts. He simply assumed a prone position behind his M1 Garand, adjusted his worn shooting jacket, and peered through the simple iron sights that had served him since 1943. His first shot at 200 yards surprised everyone. The bullet struck dead center, producing a perfect 10-ring hit. The second shot followed, then the third, fourth, and fifth. When the target was retrieved, Hank's group measured just under an inch, competitive with the modern rifles, though slightly larger. "Lucky shots," muttered Brad Morrison, though his voice carried less confidence than before. At 400 yards, the pattern repeated. Hank's iron sights seemed almost primitive compared to the high-powered scopes around him, yet his bullets continued finding their mark with stubborn consistency. His group size increased proportionally with distance, as expected, but remained remarkably tight for such basic equipment. Jimmy Rodriguez checked and rechecked Hank's targets, clearly impressed. "Hank, that's some fine shooting with iron sights. Most people couldn't hit the paper at this distance without magnification." The younger competitors were no longer laughing. Professional curiosity replaced mockery as they watched the old man work. There was something mesmerizing about Hank's shooting rhythm, steady, methodical, almost meditative. He didn't rush between shots or make adjustments to equipment. He simply aimed, breathed, and fired with the confidence of someone who'd done this thousands of times before. "How can he even see the target clearly?" wondered one spectator. "I need binoculars just to make out the bullseye from here." As the distances stretched longer, the challenge increased exponentially. At 600 yards, wind became a significant factor. At 800 yards, even tiny variations in ammunition could throw shots off target. The modern rifles, with their sophisticated wind-reading devices and ballistic computers, maintained their accuracy advantage, but Hank's performance remained surprisingly consistent. Marcus Webb began paying closer attention to the old veteran's technique. As a former military sniper, he recognized something in Hank's approach, a natural reading of conditions that couldn't be taught in civilian shooting schools. The way Hank observed grass movement, felt air currents on his cheek, and intuitively adjusted his aim spoke of experience gained through necessity rather than recreation. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" Marcus asked during a break in the competition. "Omaha Beach," Hank replied simply. "Normandy, the Bulge. When your life depends on hitting what you aim at, you learn quickly." The gravity of that statement settled over the nearby competitors. These men shot for trophies, pride, and bragging rights. Hank had shot for survival, for the lives of his fellow soldiers, for freedom itself. The weight of that experience was evident in every deliberate movement he made. As the competition progressed to the final stage, the 1,000-yard challenge, tension filled the air. This was where careers were made and legends born in the competitive shooting world. The distance was so extreme that atmospheric conditions, equipment quality, and shooter skill all had to align perfectly for success. The current record of 1.2 inches seemed almost impossible to beat. Marcus had set that mark using perfect conditions, hand-loaded ammunition tested for consistency, and equipment worth more than a luxury car. The idea that someone could approach such precision with a 76-year-old military rifle and iron sights bordered on fantasy. "Gentlemen," announced Jimmy Rodriguez, "we're shooting for the Cedar Ridge 1,000-yard precision record. Current record holder Marcus Webb will shoot first, followed by our other competitors in order of their qualifying scores." Marcus approached the 1,000-yard line with supreme confidence. His rifle was perfectly zeroed, his ammunition precisely loaded, his equipment calibrated to the micro-inch. Weather conditions were ideal: minimal wind, stable temperature, clear visibility. If he was going to break his own record, this was the day. His first shot was perfect, striking the exact center of the target. The second followed suit. By his fifth and final shot, Marcus had produced a group that measured 1.15 inches, a new personal best and a new range record. The crowd erupted in applause. "Beat that," shouted Mike Bradshaw, clearly impressed by his friend's performance. One by one, the other competitors took their turns. All shot well, but none came close to Marcus's achievement. Groups measured between 2 and 3 inches, excellent shooting by any standard, but far from record territory. Finally, it was Hank's turn. The old veteran walked to the firing line carrying only his M1 Garand and 5 rounds of ammunition. No spotting scope, no wind meter, no ballistic calculator. The crowd had grown larger as word spread about the competition, and dozens of shooters stopped their own activities to watch. "This should be interesting," someone whispered. Hank knelt behind the shooting bench and studied the target through his iron sights. At 1,000 yards, the bullseye appeared as little more than a small dot. The margin for error was measured in fractions of inches, and any mistake would be magnified exponentially at such extreme range. The old veteran closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the wind patterns on his face, listening to the subtle sounds that revealed atmospheric conditions. Then he opened his eyes, settled into position, and aimed his ancient rifle at a target that most people couldn't even see clearly. The crowd held its collective breath as Hank prepared to fire his first shot at the distance that had humbled countless shooters before him. Nobody expected miracles from the old man and his World War II relic, but everyone was curious to see how close he might come to the record that had seemed untouchable just minutes before. Hank's first shot cracked across the range with the distinctive sound of the M1 Garand, deeper and more resonant than the sharp reports of the modern rifles. Through the spotting scopes, observers watched as the bullet struck the target. Center ring, dead on. "Holy cow!" breathed Jimmy Rodriguez, studying the target through high-powered binoculars. "That's a perfect 10. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. One lucky shot was possible, but this was exactly where Hank needed to be if he had any chance of competing with Marcus's record. The old veteran worked his rifle's action, ejecting the spent brass and chambering a fresh round with practiced efficiency. His second shot followed the same rhythm. Breathe in, aim, breathe out halfway, squeeze. The rifle bucked against his shoulder, and another bullet streaked toward the distant target. Again, center ring. "2 for 2, called out the spotter. "This is unbelievable." By now, word had spread throughout the gun club. Shooters abandoned their own activities to witness what was happening at the 1,000-yard line. Cell phones came out as people began recording what might be shooting history in the making. An old man with a World War II rifle was challenging modern precision at its most extreme distance. Marcus Webb watched through his own spotting scope, professional admiration replacing any trace of dismissiveness. As a former sniper, he understood the difficulty of what Hank was accomplishing. Iron sights at 1,000 yards required not just skill, but an almost supernatural ability to read conditions and compensate for variables that sophisticated scopes and computers usually handled automatically. Hank's third shot continued the pattern. The bullet found the 10 ring again, clustering with his first 2 shots in a group that was beginning to look suspiciously tight. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. "How is this possible?" asked Brad Morrison, genuinely bewildered. "The math doesn't work. At this distance, with iron sights, the target should be practically invisible." "Maybe to you," replied an older shooter who'd served in Vietnam. "But some people learned to shoot when missing meant dying. That changes your perspective." As Hank prepared for his 4th shot, the atmosphere grew electric. 3 perfect shots were impressive, but consistency over 5 shots was what separated good shooters from legends. The old veteran showed no signs of pressure, maintaining the same deliberate rhythm that had carried him through decades of competition and a lifetime of challenges. The 4th shot rang out, another center hit. The group was staying remarkably tight, clustering in the X-ring like bullets from a machine rest rather than a 78-year-old man using equipment older than most of the spectators. "Measure it," someone called out, unable to contain their excitement. "Not yet," Jimmy Rodriguez replied firmly. "Let him finish his string. But I'll tell you this, it looks tight, real tight." Hank chambered his final round. This was it, the shot that would determine whether his performance was simply excellent shooting or something that would be talked about for years. The old M1 Garand felt as familiar in his hands as an old friend, its weight and balance unchanged despite the passage of 3/4 of a century. As he settled into position for the last time, memories flickered through Hank's mind. A sniper's nest outside St. Vith during the Battle of the Bulge. Snow falling as he'd lined up a shot that would save his squad's position. The same rifle, the same iron sights, the same steady breathing technique. Some things never changed. The final shot was perfect. When the target was finally retrieved and measured, the silence was deafening. Jimmy Rodriguez triple-checked his measurements, using digital calipers and asking 2 other officials to verify his readings. Finally, he walked back to the firing line with the target in his hands and a look of amazement on his face. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet range, "Hank Mitchell has just fired a 5-shot group measuring 0.847 inches at 1,000 yards. That's a new range record, beating the previous record by more than 0.3 of an inch. The explosion of cheering and applause could probably be heard for miles. Competitors who had mocked Hank just hours earlier were now rushing forward to shake his hand and examine his target. Cell phone cameras flashed as everyone wanted to document the moment when a World War II veteran and his ancient rifle had schooled an entire generation of modern shooters. Marcus Webb was among the first to congratulate Hank. "Sir, that was the finest shooting I've ever witnessed, with iron sights no less. How long have you been practicing for today?" Hank smiled as he began cleaning his rifle with the same care he'd shown it for 76 years. "About 60 years, give or take." Mike Bradshaw, humbled by what he'd witnessed, approached with genuine respect. "Mr. Mitchell, I owe you an apology. I don't even have words for what that was." "No apology needed, son," Hank replied quietly. "Every generation thinks they've got all the answers. Sometimes the old ways work just fine." As news of the record spread beyond the gun club, shooting magazines and websites picked up the story. WWII veteran Set's record with 1943 rifle became a viral sensation, shared millions of times across social media. The story resonated far beyond the shooting community, touching anyone who'd ever been underestimated because of their age or old-fashioned methods. Hank found himself invited to shooting events across the country, but he politely declined most of them. He'd made his point, proven what needed proving. The old M1 Garand went back to its place of honor in his gun safe, where it would rest until the next time someone needed a reminder that experience, skill, and determination could still triumph over technology and arrogance. The record still stands today, more than 4 years later. Modern rifles have grown even more sophisticated, scopes more powerful, and ammunition more precise. Yet no one has managed to beat the mark set by a 78-year-old man with a rifle older than the internet, older than television, older than most of the people who witnessed his achievement. Sometimes the old ways really are the best ways. And sometimes when people laugh at something they don't understand, they're about to learn a lesson they'll never forget. Harold Hank Mitchell and his faithful M1 Garand had taught that lesson with style, grace, and 5 perfectly placed shots that shattered more than just a shooting record. They shattered assumptions about what's possible when experience meets opportunity. The veteran and his rifle had spoken, and their message was clear. Never underestimate the power of dedication, skill, and a lifetime of knowing exactly what you're doing.